We'll just get started in a couple moments. We are waiting for a couple more people to join, and we will get started in just 1 minute. So good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to this third webinar in the webinar series of Harnessing Data in Motion. We are having two presenters today. One is Ali Bajwa, Principal Partner Solutions Engineer, and Yolanda Davis, a Senior Software Engineer. And they will cover how HDF 2.0 and Apache Ambari work together. And we'll be walking through some slides as well as some demo. So it will be recorded for anybody who wants to check it out afterwards, and we'll also have questions. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat window, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can at the end of the presentation. Just a quick overview of what we will cover. We will cover the components of Hortonworks DataFlow, which consists of Apache projects NiFi, MiNiFi, Kafka, Storm, and Ambari all together. And we had talked about originally that we may talk a little bit about Ranger, and we just did want to let you know that due to the time constraints today, we will not be able to cover the Ranger aspects of the integration because it will take too long. If you have a strong interest in that, please drop us a line in the chat window, and we will try to set up an additional webinar to cover that topic specifically, because that could take a whole 45 minutes by itself. So the goal today is to cover the overview of 2.0 and Ambari together for the first 30 minutes or so, with some demos in between. And the last 15 minutes will be for questions. That 30 minutes might turn to be 45 if you include the demo time. So just quickly, Hortonworks DataFlow manages data in motion. It covers the multiple Apache projects we talked about. So Apache NiFi from the edge on the left-hand side all the way into the core to help you move data between wherever you create it to wherever it needs to go. MiNiFi helps you access that data at the edge of the network and also provides edge intelligence in a smaller footprint than NiFi would offer you. And then in the core, you have Kafka and Storm for event stream processing so that you can do live event streaming or streaming analytics of your information as it's coming in. So the integration of this and using Apache Ambari is what we're going to cover. So Ambari is an operational tool that allows you to do several things, as you can see on this slide: cluster provisioning, configuration management, extensibility, monitoring, and service management. So we're going to spend the next 35 to 45 minutes covering how you use these two things together, and Ali and Yolanda will be able to walk you through it and answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thanks, Anna. So hey guys, my name is Ali, and I'm going to be going through a couple of things here around the Apache Ambari integration in HDF 2.0. Specifically, we're going to focus on the deployment, configuration, debugging, and monitoring pieces, and how they relate to Apache NiFi. So the idea is that for folks who are familiar with using Apache NiFi outside of Ambari, how do they get familiar with using Ambari? And as Anna mentioned, that we're not going to be covering security here just because it's a bigger topic and it can take the whole time itself. All right. So first, let's look at how Apache Ambari makes it easier to deploy NiFi in a clustered mode. So through Ambari, what you can do is deploy Apache NiFi through either the standard Ambari install wizard. If you've ever used Ambari, that's probably what you've been using. Or on the other side, you can also operationalize that through Blueprints automation. So specifically in the demos today, we're going to be going through the Ambari install wizard, but there'll be links out to try it out through the Blueprints as well. So specifically, if we look at the install wizard, there's a screenshot on the right-hand side where you can see that once you get to the appropriate page in the wizard, it will actually ask you which nodes you want Apache NiFi to be installed on. And you can just go ahead and press the plus sign and install it on whatever nodes you want. And in this way, this is showing you how you can do the install, choice of what nodes to put Apache NiFi on at the time that you're actually installing the full cluster. But the other option is that you can also add NiFi after the cluster has been installed. So after you've installed the rest of the cluster, let's say you didn't install NiFi to begin with, you can go ahead onto a particular host and add NiFi as well. And then once you add it, it'll just install it, and then you can start it as well up through Ambari. As you're going through the install, another thing you'll see is that you can configure which users and groups that Apache NiFi runs as. So again, this can be done either when you're first installing the cluster, where at what point you can actually configure all the users and groups for all the other components like Zookeeper, Storm, Kafka, and so forth. Or you can have the same tab show up when you're actually trying to add NiFi to an existing cluster as well. So if you've ever used Ambari, you'd be pretty familiar that you can use Ambari to easily stop and start services using the same either UI or the REST API. So here's an example of specifically for NiFi. I have NiFi running in a 3-node cluster, and I can use the service actions drop down to actually stop NiFi all from one place. So the nice thing is that you don't have to go into multiple nodes if you're running NiFi on multiple nodes and stop them manually. You can do that all from Ambari. And because Ambari supports REST APIs, you can do all this from the REST API as well. Starting with Ambari 2.4, there's an option to delete service as well. So you can see that right under service actions in the UI. Note that this does not remove the bits, it'll just disassociate it from Ambari. If you wanted to stop and start NiFi not across the whole cluster, but just on a single node, that is possible as well. You just go into the hosts tab in Ambari, and you can drill down into the specific host that you want, and then stop or start the NiFi service. The other thing that's provided is quick links to be able to easily access the Apache NiFi UI. The nice thing about the quick link is that it's dynamic based on the configuration that you have, because, for example, it's possible that the user has reconfigured the port that NiFi runs on, or it's also possible that the user is running with NiFi, with SSL enabled for NiFi, which uses a different port. So the nice thing is that the quick link is aware of whether SSL is enabled and what ports were configured or overridden for SSL or non-SSL. So it'll automatically open up the UI for you. You don't have to worry about remembering what ports and whether SSL was enabled or not. So with that, let's get into our first demo to deploy HDF 2.0. So I'm gonna switch over to my cheat sheet here. And this is a list of the steps that I've already done on my cluster, just to make things speed along. So high level, what I've done is I have a 3-node setup where I have CentOS 7 already installed, and I ran through these first 6 steps. So basically what I did was turn off the firewall on each of these nodes. I downloaded the Ambari repo, and these are all documented in our Hortonworks documentation for HDF. And then I'm gonna install and set up Ambari server using yum install, and then Ambari server setup -s. So the -s to accept all the defaults. And so all of this is pretty standard for installing Ambari. This is the only new step you have, and that actually installs the HDF 2.0 MPAC. So one quick note is that you do not try to run this on a cluster where Ambari is already running, where you have HTTP, because this will basically make Ambari forget about HTTP stack. And now after this command, it will only remember the HDF stack. You see this -- purge. So what that's doing is it'll kill all the existing stack that it remembers, and it'll only remember one. So make sure you only run this on a brand new setup. And once that's done, you can start up Ambari. So in my case, for registering agents, I did it manually. just to show that there's a very cool tool that you can use called Ambari Bootstrap, which can automatically install Ambari's server and Ambari agents for you. It also has the option of, covering steps 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3 through automation. So you can definitely check that out. If you just Google Ambari Bootstrap, you'll find the GitHub project. But basically what I'm doing here is I'm running these 2 lines to just run all the prerequisites, install the agents, and then register each of those nodes, the agents on those nodes, with the Ambari server. And so that is an automation that you can use as well. And once that's done, you just go ahead and Ambari started up. You can just go to the Ambari UI and access your cluster. So let's go ahead and switch over to cluster. So once you get into your cluster, you'll get into the install wizard. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the install wizard. First thing it'll ask for is name your cluster. I can call it whatever I want. In this case, I'm going to call it HDF. Just going to go ahead and next accept all the default repos. And at the next step, it'll ask you what are the nodes that you want to install HDF on, and the host registration information. So in my case, I'm going to, so this is my node number 1, and I have 3 nodes. So I have 0, 1, and 2. So I can just do this shortcut to let it know that I have 3 nodes. In my case, I've already done the manual registration, so I don't need to provide the SSH private key. This is nice if you don't want to do the SSH setup, the passwordless SSH setup. You can choose the manual registration option, and that script can help you do that for you. Next, it's going to go ahead and register my my nodes. I think I may have already registered them before, so complaining about. So after the registration is complete, it's going to basically run some pre-validation checks to make sure you have run all the prerequisites that are documented. So these are things like installing NTPD, making sure you've turned off your transparent huge pages, JDKs, all these kind of things. So here you can see I've already done that to save time, so all the checks passed. Again, if you use the Ambari Bootstrap script, it'll help you do all that stuff as well. So next page, I can choose what components I want. So you can see all the different components that are part of HDF. I have my Zookeeper, Storm, Ambari Infra, Ambari Metrics, Kafka, and Log Search optionally, and NiFi. So Log Search is a new tech preview service that we've provided where you can do log aggregation, analysis, and visualization. So next is where I can actually decide what goes where. So you can see that I have 3 of my nodes, and I can choose where I want NiFi. So currently, it's only showing NiFi on 1. So let's say I want to have a 3-node NiFi cluster. So I can just click the plus sign, and now I can decide what other nodes to put it on. So I've got it on all 3 now, so I'm going to go ahead and click next. This is if you want to assign slaves and clients. So for NiFi, there is a client called NiFi Certificate Authority, which is related to security and generating certificates. Again, we're not going to go into too much detail here. We're just going to go ahead and select the recommended options. So on the next page is where you can customize the services. So it's showing me that there's 3 at the bare minimum, there's 3 configurations I need to change. So which is for Ambari metrics, I need to provide a password for Grafana. So here I'm just setting it, so you can set it to whatever you want. Same with log search. I just need to provide the password for my log search UI. So I'm just going to go ahead and click admin. And for NiFi as well, the only real config that you need to provide anything for is the sensitive property values encryption password. So I'm going to put in some string here. But as you can see here is that most of the common configs that you would need to configure are here. We're going to go into these in a little bit more detail after kicking off the cluster install. But usually, if you're not doing any security-related stuff, these are usually the only configs that you may need to change. But if you're just trying this out for the first time, the only one property you need to set is just this sensitive property values encryption password. So once those 3 passwords were set, we can just go ahead and click next. It'll give you a warning. You can proceed anyway. And then at that point, you can just go ahead and deploy the cluster. And so that's going to take a couple of minutes to run. So we're going to move on with the next part of the presentation. And so as you can see, these are the steps that we followed: installing Ambari, installing the HDF MPack, opening the UI, and running through the install wizard. For anyone who wants to follow along with the docs at home, this is the link. The slides will be available later. You can follow along from there. So next, let's look at how Ambari makes it easy to configure NiFi. So if you remember that if you're configuring NiFi on a non-Ambari managed setup, that you have multiple config files on each of the nodes that you have NiFi running. So when you're running NiFi in clustered mode, for example, so there's multiple configuration files you would need to manage on your own. And so this, using Ambari, makes it a lot easier. It gives you a single glass pane view where you can set up the configurations for, all the NiFi nodes on, that you are running. So basically, the idea is you just configure once through Ambari instead of repeating the config on each node. And we do support most of the, common Apache NiFi config files like NiFi properties, Bootstrap, and so forth. The other nice thing that you get as part of the configuration is that you get assistance as part, UI assistance when you, for example, trying to, fill out those values. So let's say you're not sure what a certain property is meant for. As you hover over it, you will get some help text hints, and those are coming from the NiFi doc. So it's nice to have it all in one place. You have, things like checkboxes instead of putting true or false, user-friendly labels and default values. The other nice thing is that Ambari can, take care of computed values automatically. So, for example, if you've ever configured NiFi in a multi-node setup, you'll know that one of the things that you have to provide is the, FQDN or the IP address of the current node. So if you have a 10-node cluster, that can get kind of, tedious to enter manually. So what Ambari can do is it already has an agent running there, so it knows what the FQDN is. So it can go ahead and populate that for you. And, other than just NiFi specific stuff, you also get the benefit of the general Ambari config features. So things like configuration history. So you can see every time you save a config, Ambari keeps track of that. So you can always go back in time and see all the different changes you made. You can revert to older versions. You can diff between versions. So all that good stuff. And then because Ambari is all REST API based, you can also update those configs through those APIs. So if you're worried about how do you operationalize this stuff, you can definitely use Ambari's REST APIs for that. So here's a screenshot showing, for example, on the left-hand side is that I can see the different versions, and I can do comparison. And in this case, it's showing me the difference between V3 and V5. The other nice thing you can do through Ambari is, I spoke earlier about how you just have one config to manage, and it, propagates that out to all the nodes. So what if you do want to override one of the properties on one of the nodes, right? For whatever reason, that node needs to have a different, let's say a directory where you want to install NiFi on, or different max memory allocation. So that provision is also provided. So in Ambari, you can click on the plus button, which is override, and that will essentially allow you to create what's called a NiFi configuration group, and you can decide, how many different configuration groups you want, what hosts should be in each configuration group, and then what properties should be different in each of the configuration groups. So in this case, for example, I wanted to have one of the NiFi nodes to have more memory, so I can create a new config group with that, and then I can add a node into that for that configuration group. So as I showed when we were installing the cluster through NiFi, through Ambari, the first tab is where all the common configs have been grouped together and exposed in the very first config accordion called Advanced NiFi Ambari Config. And the idea there is we wanted to make it easier for the general folks who are maybe not doing security. So all the basic sort of configs that you may need for first-time install are all clubbed together in one spot. So things like the ports, so what's the SSL port, non-SSL port, the initial and max memory, the repo default dir location, so your provenance dir, your content dir, your DB and flow file locations. And then what's new with Ambari is that there's this idea of an internal directory location, and which essentially contains files NiFi will write to. So this is one place where there's a little bit of a difference between, having standalone NiFi versus Ambari managed NiFi. When you have Ambari managing a component, there's a difference between config files which are read-only versus those which, NiFi will be writing to. So they need to go in different locations. So the config files which are read-only, so things like NiFi.properties or bootstrap.conf, those go under your user HTTP current NiFi directory. But the ones that NiFi is going to be writing to, so things like flow files, your authorizations files, and so forth, they need to go to a different directory. So all those read-write files are going to be written to an internal directory location, which you can configure through Ambari. And it'll have a couple of subfolders. You'll have a conf subfolder for your flow file, for your authorizations XML file. And then there'll be a state subdirectory that manages your internal state. And if you wanted to change those subdirectory names, you can. There's a property in Ambari where you can do that. The other common properties are the Zookeeper Z node and also the sensitive props key, which is the one that we populate, and that's used to encrypt your sensitive property values. So here's an example of what that looks like, that first tab. So as you recall, the sensitive property values was the only one we had to populate, but you can see that the other locations can be configured pretty easily through Ambari. And if you wanted to change, for example, the subdirectories under that internal directory or what that internal directory was, again, they're all exposed over here. And here you can see an example of the help text. As you hover over, it'll give you some hints as to what it's expecting you to put in there. So the main NiFi properties file is the NiFi.properties, and the content of that whole properties file is exposed under the Advanced NiFi Properties config tab, and they're exposed as key value pairs. And the idea is that instead of just clubbing that whole config file, under a big a text box called Jinja template in Ambari, we separate them out into individual key value pairs. So the idea is that as you hover over each key, you'll get a help text hint of what it should be, what it's expecting you to put in. The other thing is what we can do is we can replace the values for those. And the way we do that is we put in these variables surrounded by double braces. So it gives the flexibility where we know for a lot of these what they need to be set to, so we can pre-default them. So for example, to set the Zookeeper, because we know that you're using the external Zookeepers that come with HDF, you don't need to worry about figuring out what the Zookeeper string should be. We can figure that out and auto-populate it. But at the same time, we have the flexibility that for advanced users who want to override that, they can easily just remove that value and then add the custom value that they wanted. And same with adding extra properties. You can always add extra properties through the custom NiFi properties, and that will get written out to all the nodes. So one of the reasons you might want to do that is if you want to have additional locations for your repos. So for example, for your content repo, if you have more than just one directory, you want to have multiple directories. The way in NiFi to do that in NiFi properties is you just declare new properties. So the way to do it through Ambari managed NiFi is to add properties in the custom NiFi properties. And here's some examples of what that looks like. You can see that a bunch of these properties have been are going to be auto-detected, but because it's a text box, you can always override it and set it to whatever you like. And then for other property values, what we've done, which are not as common, what we've done is we just expose them as Jinja templates, which is nothing more than a big text box with the contents of the config. So all the the content is there. So if anyone wants to add properties or reconfigure properties, they can. But at the same time, we're using that same double braces technique to to auto detect some of the properties that we already know that should be set. And again, once you make a change in Ambari and then restart NiFi, all those properties files will get written out. So a good example of that is the bootstrap.conf. So here you can see under the advanced NiFi bootstrap env, we have the contents of the full bootstrap.conf file. And you can see that we're sort of detecting what the lib directory is, the conf directory is, the initial mem, max mem, it's being defaulted from where we initially declared it at the top level as a top level config. So again, all those things are being auto-detected to make it easier. But at the same time, for advanced users, we have the full file exposed here, so anyone who wants to can actually make changes. And that goes for other configs as well. So like I mentioned Zookeeper string again earlier. So if you look at the advanced NiFi state management env, we are auto-detecting a lot of the Zookeeper stuff in there. So it's also exposed from Ambari. One interesting thing to note is most of these config files, they're written out with either 400 or 600 permission. And the reason for that is that the NiFi property files that are managed by Ambari will have some plain text passwords. So like your NiFi properties files will still have plain text passwords. So we want to make sure that those can only be accessed by the NiFi user. So that takes us to the end of config. So I want to pause at this point and just see if there's any questions.
There was a question that came in earlier. Should NiFi be installed only on the edge node and not on all the nodes? And there's another question, but we'll cover that one later. So
Sure.
I think because when you were going through the demo, they were asking about on that edge nodes and not. And Yolanda, did you want to cover that right now, or do you, Ali, do you want to cover that? I think Yolanda was going to cover that really quick.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
Yeah, sure, I can cover that right now. So just to kind of give a baseline understanding of edge node, in this context, we mean those nodes that basically sit on the outside or at the gateway staging area typically to get data into Hadoop. Only is kind of a strong word. We would probably say usually NiFi is installed on edge nodes, typically because they're clients to Hadoop cluster or maybe other places where you want to land data. So usually you will see NiFi installed on edge nodes. Well, I won't say all the time.
All right, great, thank you. We're going to move on to the next section. We have a couple more questions that we will hold for the end because they're more general. Okay. And we will do the next section of the presentation, and there's another demo you had still, right?
Yeah. All right, so let's get into the ease of debugging. So what we've done with Ambari 2.4 is there's a new component called log search. And what it allows you to do is to visualize and debug all your logs for HDF and HTTP without having to connect via SSH to any of the hosts. So for NiFi specifically, it's monitoring your NiFi app.log, your NiFi users.log, your NiFi bootstrap.log. and it can monitor, fatal error or warning messages for all of HDF services. So you can get this nice sort of dashboard of, you get an idea of, what are all your errors, when they happened, how many of them were warnings versus errors. You can drill into them either at the component level, by the host level, or just, through the logs in terms of errors. You can highlight, you can kind of choose, whether you want to see only the errors or only the errors and warnings, whatever levels that you want to do. The other nice thing is that you can filter out errors. So if there's an error that keeps repeating in your logs, you can kind of highlight it and right-click on it and say exclude, and then it makes it a lot easier to find the needle in the haystack when you're looking in the logs for errors. So we're going to see that in the demo coming up. Next, let's take a look at ease of monitoring. So one of the things you'll notice with the new NiFi is that it takes a little bit longer, especially if you're running a NiFi in clustered mode, for it to actually come up to a point where the UI is up and you can log in. So to help folks figure out whether NiFi is actually up yet, we have what's called the service check, which you can access through the service actions. And so the idea is that will basically check to see if the endpoints are up yet, are the UIs up yet, and so you can basically run that, and it'll keep checking until it comes up. You can also invoke that through REST API. So if you're trying to automate some stuff where you deploy a cluster through blueprints and wait until NiFi is actually up before moving on to the next phase of your scripts, you can invoke a service check and use that for that. We also have NiFi alerts. So Ambari has this option to have alerts. So where if a service goes down, you want to take an action like maybe sending an email or something like that. So we have an alert for NiFi, which monitors the NiFi PID files. If you want to, for example, if you know that you're going to be restarting NiFi and you've set up alerts and you don't want a lot of people to be alerted, when you know that there's going to be downtime, you can just turn on maintenance mode for NiFi. And what that means is that it won't give any alerts at that point when you stop NiFi or restart it or whatnot. So here's an example of I have NiFi running in maintenance mode, and I'm going to be turning it off. There's an alerts tab where you can view all the different alerts that are set up across HDF. So you can do things like disable a certain alert. You can configure an alert. So for example, change the polling interval for that alert. And what can you do with that alert? You can set up either email or SNP notifications to your admin. So here's an example of me creating a NiFi email alert where I'm saying that NiFi is down and I'm sending an email out using the SMTP server. And we also have integration with Ambari metrics. So the way it works is that in NiFi, there's an option to have a reporting task called Ambari reporting task. You can either set this up manually, or if you actually do an install through Ambari, we're going to automate that setup. And what it does is under the covers, when you do an install through Ambari, it's actually auto-creating an Ambari reporting task in NiFi and pointing it to the AMS collector, host, and port. So it's auto-detecting all that stuff. So that's another example of where Ambari is auto-detecting some stuff for you. And once it and the way it's doing that is that we're actually, as part of the NiFi install, we're setting up an initial flow.xml. And that flow.xml is basically setting up that Ambari reporting task. If you want to see what that flow.xml looks like, it's actually exposed through Ambari, so that means it's configurable. And you can actually make changes there. So if you wanted to, in theory, auto-deploy a NiFi flow, so you set up a flow using blueprints, and you set up NiFi on an HDF cluster with blueprints, and you want to automatically have a flow running there when you start, you can actually paste in the flow over here. Just note that you probably want to copy that flow.xml from an existing running cluster where you already have the AMS integration already done, the Ambari metrics integration, so that you don't break the Ambari metrics integration by doing that. And one of the nice things is that we're not actually hard coding the the AMS collector URL in the NiFi UI, it's actually getting picked up as dynamic variables that are defined in bootstrap.conf. And so if you look at the Bootstrap env, you'll see that we have a couple of arguments here which are specific to the Ambari metrics. And what that means is that since the URL is being picked up from the NiFi Bootstrap, this file is being managed by Ambari. So let's say you move your metrics collector, right? So this URL changes. Next time you restart NiFi, because Ambari is managing that, Ambari will let NiFi know that, hey, your AMS host got moved over, so now I'm going to write out the URL of the new one. So that's a nice thing, is that you don't have to worry about things like that. If you change where your AMS collector is on your cluster, NiFi will automatically pick it up. So what does this all mean? So what's the result of setting up the Ambari metrics integration? So what this means is that if you click on NiFi in Ambari, you can see this nice dashboard of widgets, which show things like the number of flow files that were sent or received, the number of MBs that were read or written, the JVM usage, thread counts, all that kind of stuff is available through the Ambari UI. And for each of these widgets, you can actually drill down into these widgets to look at results from the last 1, 2, 4 hours, 1 day, 1 week, etc. You can also export those metrics as CSV or JSON. The other interesting thing that we've added recently right around Ambari 2.4 is the option for Grafana. So the metrics since the metrics are already written into Ambari, we also package Grafana as part of Ambari, and you can actually view those same metrics through Grafana. And so it can be accessed through the quick link under the Ambari metrics service. And we've provided a number of widgets already out of the box, but the nice thing about Grafana is that it makes it a lot easier to create your own widgets. Just note that Ambari is managing all the widgets in this dashboard. So if you want to, as part of upgrades, will want to back up any custom widgets that you create in Grafana. So this is a quick summary of what we discussed. So the HDF to install HDF, you can install a management pack that defines all the services and stack definitions. There's a wizard-driven setup that we showed earlier. You can get access to NiFi configs, stop, start, and restart all through Ambari. We have a reporting task for Ambari metrics. By default, we're going to be starting up NiFi in clustered mode when starting through Ambari. Again, when managed through Ambari, we're going to leverage the Zookeeper on the HDF stack, not the embedded Zookeeper. And then we also give some Stack Advisor configuration, so we're going to automate some of the security stuff, which we haven't really covered a whole lot of here. And then there's also audit logging via the Apache Infra Solar, Apache Infra service, which is Solar under the covers. So one of the important things to remember is that you cannot install Ambari to manage an HDF cluster on a system where HTTP is already installed. So if you already have an HTTP set up or anywhere where you have agents running, you don't want to install HDF over there. But as soon as you run that command to install the MPack, that cluster will forget about HTTP and will only know about HDF. So you need a dedicated instance, a separate Ambari setup from your existing sandbox or HTTP cluster. So let's do a quick demo for exploring HDF. So what we're going to do is look at a little bit about the different NiFi configurations, configuration groups, metrics, the log search integration, service checks, and alerts. So let me flip into my... So here's the HDF cluster that I have. So this is a different one. I wasn't sure if we were going to be able to set up the other cluster in time. So this is a separate cluster I've set up. So here you can see I have on the left-hand side all the different services that got deployed. So the same ones that we spoke earlier. This one happens to be a secured cluster. So I also have Ranger set up, but the core concepts are the same. Under NiFi, you can see that I have 3 NiFis running. So the 3-node setup. And then here you can see the different metrics that I have. So here I'm not really running any flows, so that's why all of these are not showing a whole lot of interesting info. But, and then under configs, I can go ahead and look at all the different configs, the same configs that were available to me at install time. So these are the common configs available under the NiFi Ambari config. And then the NiFi properties is the one with all the config related things for just setting up NiFi, whether it's in clustered mode and whatnot. So again, by default, we're auto detecting that and setting up as a node when managed through Ambari. But you can see that all of that stuff is exposed through here rather than having to dig around with XML and properties files. It's all exposed in a nice UI over here with help text, which is coming from the docs. And then the bootstrap is also exposed here. That's exposed in a little bit differently, so that here you can see the exact file contents as you would expect them, and you can just modify the file here and save and restart NiFi. And how do you do the restart? So under service actions, there's a couple options to stop NiFi service across the whole cluster, to restart, to run your service check, to turn on maintenance mode if you want to not get alerts, and to delete the services. Here's the quick link that we showed earlier. So you can see that I have a 3-node cluster. I can log into any one of these UIs. And that'll just bring up the NiFi UI, and you can see that I'm running NiFi in clustered mode. Over here, running in clustered mode. So let's take a quick look at the alert. So you can see here that I'm getting a green check mark, which means all the NiFi services are up on all 3 of the nodes. If I click on this NiFi, it takes me to the first node. So you can see that this is my node number 0, and I can see the status of the services on just this node. I can just, if I wanted to restart components just on this node, I can do that from here. I can also just restart NiFi on this one node from here as well. So you have a lot of different options here. If you wanted to add other services which are not installed on this node, you can use this add tag as well. So under alerts, you'll see that all the different services are available here. So if I click on no alerts, you'll see that the status is okay. And you can see the details over here. Successful connection. So if I were to actually stop NiFi on one of those nodes, you'll see that it'll show me something else. So as my NiFi is stopping on this node, you'll see that the general status for NiFi has turned to red because it detected at least one of the components is down. So give this guy a couple of minutes to stop and for the alerts to kick in. But in the meantime, we can look at the Grafana integration. So as I mentioned here, you can see all the different widgets around the metrics. So for example, if I drill down here, I can look at the metrics based on all these different values. And you can see here, for example, now I'm getting that alert. And so if I'd set up email alerts to be set and sent out, at this point I'd be getting those email alerts as well. So the other thing to see on the Ambari metrics side is if you click on the quick link through Ambari metrics, you'll see the Grafana dashboard. You'll see that there's a couple of different dashboards for each of the components. There's a system one for general monitoring. So here you can get an idea of things like CPU counts, total memory, your load average, memory usage, and disk utilization, all that kind of stuff. but then I can go into specifically for NiFi as well. Go into the NiFi home and see all those same widgets that we defined in Ambari. You can see that I can get all the details over here as well. And a lot of people like Grafana because it's relatively easy to, customize these dashboards versus having to learn how to customize them in Ambari. So the other thing we want to look at is the log search. So this is how you debug through NiFi. So I'm going to open up log search using the quick link under log search. So here you can see, as you log in, you get an idea of just across the cluster for all your components, how many errors you have, how many warnings you have. But if I want to drill down into NiFi, I click on NiFi, and then all of a sudden it's filtered it out by only the log files that are relevant to NiFi. And here I can choose my time frame as well. So let's say over the last 7 days, I can see there's 466 errors and 249 warnings. I can go to the log specifically, and now you can see that I can sort of, first of all, so this is what it looks like over the last 7 days. Let's say I want to only look at the last couple of days. I can drill down into just the specific time frame that I want, and now I can drill down by either the components, by the host, or by the actual log itself. And what you can also do is start an auto refresh. So it's kind of every 10 seconds, it'll auto refresh this page. So it's kind of like doing a tail file on your log files to get the latest error messages. Or you can actually just force the refresh from here. And then the feature I was talking about earlier is that let's say this is a message that I don't really care about. Let's say it's just the socket exception. What I can easily do is say I want to exclude all instances of this guy. And so now that error is removed from here, but you'll see it shows up in my filters up here. So I can easily, remove that filter later. Stop the refresh. And now I can easily, drill down further and, remove other sorts of error messages as well. So it makes it a lot easier to debug it. At the same time, if I wanted to, I could, remove the warnings that I didn't want to see. If I wanted to enable infos at the time of installing, I could have enabled logging at info and debug level as well. So this gives you a good idea of how it, the integration with Ambari makes it a lot easier to troubleshoot not just NiFi, but all the different components. Here we specifically showed NiFi. So that more or less covers the main things I wanted to show in the demo. So I want to pause and look at what questions that might have come up.
Yeah, if you want to just go, I think you had a couple more slides because it would help people. I think we're not going to have time to answer everybody's question. So if you do have questions, we really encourage you to go to Hortonworks community channel or community so that if you have questions, you can just type in your questions there. If we can't get them today, we have more questions than we can answer if we talk really, 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 really fast. So we have a couple of questions. I'm just going to clarify a couple things to start with, and then we'll go through some of the broader questions and then get a little more detailed. So one of the really broad questions is what's the difference between HDP and HDF? And just quickly on that, HDP is Hortonworks Data Platform, and it is a series of Apache projects, primarily based on Hadoop, and it is for data at rest. And then the Hortonworks DataFlow is a corollary or a partner to that, and it is all for data in motion. It also consists of a few different Apache projects. Some Apache projects lend themselves to both sides. For example, as you've noticed already, Ambari is used for configuration and operations for both HDP and HDF. As Ellie just mentioned, right now it needs to be a separate instance, but that's the commonality between projects. So there is some overlap between projects, but their primary purposes are different. Now, there's a couple other questions, a couple more specifics in terms of how NiFi works itself, and then a couple of Ambari-related questions. So I'll go through the first one. The first question that we have is, when transporting incoming data via NiFi, can we expose the incoming data to downstream systems via a REST API? And Yolanda, I think you were going to take that question, right?
Yes. So with NiFi, remember, this helps us to create flows that will help us orchestrate obtaining, doing some transformation, and then landing data. So in this particular question, yes, you can, whether you're obtaining data from some external REST API, you can also post to some downstream system. We have a particular process called post HTTP, which you can use to actually post your flow file data or your information that you're transforming or moving through the system down to a downstream system.
And sort of also related to NiFi, there's another question about, are there predefined workflow templates for NiFi that can be reused or enhanced?
Absolutely, you can create templates. So if you have a particular idea on how you want your flow to be orchestrated, what particular areas you want to pull in data from, what processing you need to do with that data, that flow can be created, but we also have the ability to create a template from that flow. And that template can be reused in other instances of NiFi.
Yeah, so just to add to that, Yolanda, there's actually a GitHub repo for about 30 commonly used NiFi flows that our field team have put together, and engineers. You can find that on the same website that's showing on your screen right now, community.hortonworks.com.
So there's yes. So the answer is yes, and there's a few places. Now there was a specific question, are these metrics, so this is back to the demo that Ali did, are the metrics schedulable or downloadable in PDF or other formats? So this is related to your demo.
Yeah, so the downloadable, we showed that you could download them to the CSV or JSON formats. So I think those are the currently supported formats. On the schedulable, that I would need to check back on. I believe the answer is yes, but we can check back and get back.
All right, I'm just looking through the list of questions. There are many. So just before, we're almost at the top of the hour. We will get back to you if we have the questions. So your questions are captured if we need to get back to you. If you would like to, you can also post your questions to Hortonworks community. And I will go through, probably we have time for the last two questions. So there was one question, another NiFi question, an Ambari question. So let's do the Ambari question first. Can we use Ambari for upgrades or just for initial installation?
Yeah, so today, in general, Ambari supports upgrades for, other components, like all the HTTP components. Specifically for NiFi, because this was the first release of NiFi, the upgrade logic isn't there yet, but it's going to be added, in the next release.
And one last NiFi question. Is there a predefined set of rules to be applied to the incoming data in NiFi, and can there be custom rules that can be stored by multiple users?
I think it's more kind of understanding what NiFi is doing. So it's not a predefined set of rules. And as I said earlier, you use NiFi in order to create a flow that will define how you want to pull in data, or what those rules will be in order to pull data and do some transformation on that data if you need to, and where that data will eventually land. A rule set can be created by creating a template, and you can support that template, but it's not like some predefined rule that comes with the tool itself. We're looking to those data flow managers and those users of NiFi to use it in order to define how they want to process data.
Great. One very last NiFi question that just came in, the very last one that we'll be able to take. Does NiFi have processes to work with SFDC? And Yolanda,
yeah, and Salesforce. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I do know, there's integrations, at least out there in our community. I know a lot of people have posted questions about Salesforce specifically, whether or not you can use their REST API in order to integrate with it. But I would say definitely check on our community to see if there are others who have contributed in that space.
Yes, we do know of a lot of integrations with it. I do not think there's a specific processor for it right now, but there's definitely a lot of customers or a lot of people who do integrate the two together. So we're at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for everyone's time. The recording will be available probably in about a couple hours, and the slides will be posted as well, so we'll share that with you, and any remaining questions we will get back to you individually. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.